What is up, everybody? Welcome to Shoot the Gap, the fantasy football podcast here, or show, I should say, here on the fantasy football podcast here at Fantasy and Frames. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. With me, we've got JT, Justin Taylor, and tonight we're continuing our divisional previews, going around the league, talking about the fantasy football players for defense, aka your IDPs, that you should be rostering and maybe avoiding in fantasy football drafts this month. So before we get to that, let's get to this. What is going on, my friend Justin with JT? What's going on, brother?
Good, man. Just getting ready for football. First football game of the year. Going to miss the Expo this weekend. Really sad about that. But my son, his fifth grade team, we've got our first game of the year coming up here on Saturday. So trying to get all the final installs in, the offense, the defense, all that. But we've got some break in the weather here in Illinois. It's been more in the 70s, a little overcast. It's been phenomenal because the first couple of weeks of practice was in the 90s and blazing hot. So I feel like we're getting a little more accomplished here leading up to game day.
Love it. So for those of you who are in internet land here, we got a comment already. Missing the Expo sucks. Yes, Chris Battis. I know. Dude, another person here in the Fantasy and Frames family who won't be able to make it. It sucks because he came down last year, then I got injured. Now I'm going. He can't make it. It's just we got to get on the same page. We got to meet halfway somewhere in between and have some poutine or something. And yes, I really do want to try poutine. I'm not just saying that.
Yeah, I'd love to get there. Hopefully I can make it next year. It just so happens we're on a road game that's like over an hour away and it's in the wrong direction. So I'm like, oh man, by the time we get done with the game, do all that, travel back, I'm like, I would be forever for me to drive to Ohio. So hopefully I get a little better schedule next year if we have a game and I can actually get the game out of the way in the morning and drive there anyway. So.
No, I hear you. So before we get into talking about the IDP players that you should be paying attention to and maybe avoiding from the NFC South, we dropped some news a while ago, which is kind of like outside the realm of football. In fact, it's very much so outside the realm of football. We announced, for those who are unaware, that we are going to start our coverage of fantasy hockey. That's right. The NHL is coming to Fantasy and Frames, and we're going to be talking some hockey with Justin Taylor. We're going to be doing the Around the Ice podcast. So instead of going into detail first, let's just play you a little intro of what to expect here for the show. Dude, I have a few.
I love it. I'm fired up.
I have a few months to get myself ready for fantasy hockey. I cannot wait. This is going to be awesome. Tell us a little bit of what the people can expect here, JT.
Yeah, so it's me and my friend Brian Toast Clark, and we also have a guest on sometimes. Our friend Aaron Tomatich jumps on and talks a little hockey with us. So we do a little bit of everything. I'm going to throw it out to you next Tuesday night. We will have our first episode of the season, the new season here on on Fantasy and Frames. We got our Around the Ice here on Fantasy and Frames. We're pumped about being on Fantasy and Frames with the hockey show. We kind of did it ourselves last year as part of the Stew with JT Brew podcast on Wednesday nights. So we're going to move it to Tuesday nights here. We're really excited about it. We're going to give you all kinds of previews. If you ever thought about starting a hockey league, what to do, we're going to get into an entry video. We've got our home league that used to be a keeper league, now turning into a dynasty league. We're going to show you how to do that, how do you get into dynasty league. We always talk about redraft keeper as well, in case you're wanting to get in and just start a new league or you've never played fantasy hockey before. Bunch of previews throughout the season. And then as we get into the year, we talk about what's happening all around the ice in the NHL. We talk about fantasy impact, and then we also have our betting segment where if you like to get into hockey betting, we take shot props, we take game props, we take all kinds of different props and stuff. So we'll throw that into the mix as well on shows and kind of give you an idea of what we're doing or what we're looking at throughout the season. So it's a fun time. It's a good group of guys, really knowledgeable about hockey. And I'm a football is my first love, but I've gotten bigger and bigger into hockey over the last couple of years. And so my friend Toast brought up the idea. It's like, man, we should do a fantasy podcast. I was like, he's like, we know what we're talking about. I was like, all right, man. So we got in there and we've done it. And I think it's a pretty good show, pretty knowledgeable. And we talk in depth about stuff, but we also keep it enough surface that if you're kind of new to the game or new to fantasy or hockey in general, you can follow us. So I think that's something that maybe we do that a lot of other podcasts don't do.
Dude, well, I cannot wait. I remember last November, it was in the doldrums of the fantasy football season where we were just like, on the cusp of getting to playoff time, but not quite there. And, teams are doing either well or doing poorly. And I spoke out on Twitter. I'm like, I see the ESPN leagues opening up. I see the other platforms putting out advertisements for fantasy hockey. And I'm just like, man, I do want to start picking up another sport, but I don't know which one to go to. And then, coincidentally, and this is probably the dumbest thing you probably have heard all day, JT, but the Mighty Ducks was on my TV, and it was a sign.
Nice. It is a sign. That's a great movie, by the way.
Yeah. It was a sign that I needed to get into fantasy hockey, and so I started following all these people. I ended up not doing it, but it was a sign. You and I have been talking about this for about a month or so, and it's one of those things. Fantasy and frames. I'm never afraid to take chances on something, especially something that people are passionate about. And I am super excited for you and Toast to just do your thing here and have a great time and just crank out great fantasy hockey content.
Yeah, we're pumped about it, and we didn't do this last year, but we're going to do this year. We're going to do a listeners league for anyone who wants to try to get in first. So that haven't played hockey before, we're just going to set up a redraft 1 year league just for people that want to try to get their feet wet. So Jorge, this would be a good one for you to jump in if you want to take a shot at it. We're doing that. So my buddy John McGlynn, who's also here on Fantasy and Frames with me, we do the Dynasty Evaluation podcast. He got into our hockey league last year and he loved it. So he was really pumped. He had never played fantasy hockey before, but he liked hockey. He's a Blackhawks fan. So he jumped in and he had a really good time in our league. So he's pumped to stick around in the league. And we talked about it. We said, hey, if we get enough people that are interested, we're going to do a listeners league for Around the Ice and try to kind of get anybody who's never played in a league, do something pretty simple for people and then kind of go from there. So we'll have that next week for you on the show and kind of we'll shoot out on the Fantasy and Frames Twitter page and all that on, how you sign up and all those things as we get closer to the season.
I do want to apologize for those who normally follow us on X. Elon Musk apparently decided that in order to be able to stream directly to X, we have to upgrade our subscription per month here for verification. So I am doing that as we speak, trying to get us to go back to going up live on X. But if you are listening in podcast form, like we hope you are, or watching on YouTube, we appreciate you tuning in. I'll try and put this out here, pre-recorded it, of course, on X once we get the premium account thing situated, which I'll take care of ASAP. But just for programming notes for people who are listening, and why didn't I see this on Twitter last night? Or it's because Elon Musk can go suck it. That's why. But that's neither here nor there. Chris Battistel, as the Fantasy and Frames token Canadian, I got to be in. So boom, there it is.
We have to. I don't know if it's a hockey league if you don't have a Canadian in your league. You gotta have a Canadian in there.
I love it.
So it's the natural pastime there.
100%. All right, JT, let's talk about this division. It is ugly on offense. It is equally as ugly on defense, I would like to say, which can and cannot make for great IDP talk here. But we're going to tell you who are the gems and And let's start off with, a team that's kind of one of my favorite from a defensive standpoint. And it's not saying much, but that's the New Orleans Saints. Chris Battisell, you'll be happy again, being a Saints fan, that I'm talking about the Saints here. And let's talk about the defensive line first. I am not that person who will say I was the first one in on this player. Give me the notoriety, give me the credit, blah 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 blah. I'm not going to say that. I am going to say that I was kind of early on Carl Granderson. I was probably not the first, but when I saw his end to his season a couple of seasons ago, heading into last year, so 2022 heading into 2023, I was completely blown away by this the synergy that him and Cameron Jordan had on opposite ends of the defensive line. And you saw Carl Granderson take the next step this past year, finishing as the defensive lineman 8 at Fantasy Pro scoring, averaging 10 points per game, had 8.5 sacks, had a pressure rate of 11.5%, which was 8th best in all of edge rushers according to Pro Football Focus. The guy's a beast. Rhett Manuel last summer did a Dynasty target piece, an IDP Dynasty target piece on him. Coincidentally, also a Saints fan. It just, there's not much you can say other than thank God that there is a situation here for New Orleans where they have a locked in, solidified edge rusher now to kind of carry the torch from Cameron Jordan. And although I am a little bit disappointed, I was hoping we were going to get like a Von Miller, Bradley Chubb kind of tandem, early on in one's career, like, when it's not similarly to Carl Granderson being the Bradley Chubb of the two. But man, Cameron Jordan, you look back at last year, defensive lineman 101, averaging 4.3 points per game, only 2 sacks, but it coincidentally had an 11% pressure rate, which was 10th best in the NFL. So he was getting there, but he wasn't getting there. He wasn't getting close enough. For fantasy purposes here, what are your thoughts on here? Like, is there any redeeming qualities here for Cameron Jordan? Has the name finally lost some of its luster, and it's purely a Carl Granderson show?
I mean, Carl Granderson, I think you're right. He's the guy you want in this scenario for sure. I still think he's a little under the radar from people that are a little more maybe new. He doesn't maybe have the name recognition of some other guys. So I think he's one of the D linemen that I'm targeting because I think he falls a bit in drafts compared to some of the other guys that maybe he's more productive than. The real question for Cameron Jordan, he's getting up there in age. This guy has been in the league over a decade. He has had an unbelievable career. He's going to go down as one of the best Saints defensive players of all time. It was a down year last year, tackles, sacks, everything. But he's only 2 years removed from a 12.5 sack season, 8.5 2 years ago, the 3 years ago, 12.5. So I'm not totally out on him. He's not a guy I maybe am going after, but I'm definitely going to watch him. If he doesn't get drafted, I maybe take him late in the league if I'm like need some more D linemen. Or he's a guy I would put on my watch list because maybe he comes out and gets off to a good start. You're like, oh, okay, he's going to have a good year. I could be in on him. The question is going to be how much does Chase Young, do they look at Cameron Jordan and they go, okay, we got 2 guys here. One guy's been banged up a lot. One guy's, a pretty good aged veteran. Do they rotate those guys a lot to try to keep them both fresh? That's going to be the question for me. Is Granderson kind of the guy on the other side, and do they do a little more of a rotation on the opposite side of Granderson?
Fair points there. So for fantasy purposes, Carl Granderson, you say he's a little bit under the radar. Is he more of a must get for Dynasty and get him if he's available for redraft, or are they both for fantasy purposes? Him, is he somebody that you want to actively go after?
I like him in both. I just feel like because of the name recognition, he's maybe not that first wave of D linemen off the board. So that's why I feel like he's got some nice value. You can usually grab him in a fairly decent spot for the production he gives you. I like him everywhere. I'll take him in redraft. I'll take him in Dynasty. But like I said, if I'm not, you're going to see those people. They're going to go after the TJ Watts, the Myles Garretts, the the Crosbys. They're going to go all those guys early. Granderson's going to be in that kind of that second tier for you. And I think you can get him a couple rounds later. So he's definitely a guy that I want on in my queue, and I'm definitely just waiting on the right time to take him.
Okay, let's go to the linebacking position here, unless there's somebody else you want to talk about along the defensive line.
That's pretty much it for me. Occasionally, the only guy that I'm looking at other than those two guys is if I'm in a league that starts defensive tackle. So that is where I want to take a look at Brian Breezy. Yeah, the second-year guy out of Clemson, drafted him, real young player. They knew he was young coming out. You knew it would take just a bit of time for him to kind of adjust to the game. I think he could be a very, very good defensive tackle. If you look at our lads and some other depth charts, right now he's not even technically the starter. He's backing up Kalen Saunders. So redraft, I'm probably not on Breezy, but I'm on him for Dynasty because I think in the future he's a guy that could be very helpful for defensive tackle. So more of a reality sports online or my fantasy league where you start defensive tackle, I'm in on him there. I'm probably not taking him in a sleeper league where it's only D-line across the board, no D-tackle designation.
All right, sounds good. Okay, let's go to the linebacking position. And I've been a fan of this guy since he was, his last season on the New York Jets, where he was just, head and shoulders above everybody in terms of consistency and tackling, well over 100 tackles a year. Lots of free agency, signed with the New Orleans Saints. This is probably 2017 or 2018 when this happened. So I've been following this guy a long time. He just puts up high tackle volume numbers. I once dubbed him on Twitter the hashtag tackle machine and tagged him. I did the thing you're not supposed to do, tag pro athletes, which I think it's one of those. First of all, I think that's stupid.
It's positive. I don't think it's dumb if you do. Yeah. The only time I think is tagging guys is wrong is when you're complaining about them in fantasy.
Correct.
Like you're tagging like, oh, you had a terrible game. You should have got me that final touchdown when you got tackled at the one, and they add them and are talking smack. That's the only time I'm really like, all right, guys, I don't mind you complaining about it in fantasy. I complain about stuff all the time, but adding a guy that you're complaining about him, that's about the only time I'm like, yeah, that's let's have a little more tact than that. I don't think it's wrong to at players when you're talking good about them or you do a preview about them or something like that. I'm in the boat that I think those guys like it because I've seen those guys, retweet that stuff all the time and like those comments.
Well, he did. He liked it. And he retweeted the fact that we called him a hashtag tackle machine. And I'm just like, oh my God, Demario Davis just recognized me. He acknowledged me, aka like Roman Reigns. I felt so good. And you go back to last year, people who were rostering him as their linebacker, they were feeling pretty good. He had 121 total tackles, which was 13th most amongst all linebackers, 74 solo to 47 assists. His tackles for a loss were impressive. He was 10th in tackles for a loss with 12. The thing that really impresses me the most, though, is his pressures and of course, his sack totals. He had like 6.5 sacks, which was, again, for inside linebackers to get those high sack totals. It adds another dimension to their game. He's definitely being asked to blitz. Just a multifaceted player, however you slice it, whether it's blitzing, whether it's applying pressure, whether it's just getting those tackles over the middle of the field. He's everything you want. He finished last year as the LB 19 in fantasy pro scoring, averaging 12.7 points per game, has a 10.3% tackle rate, which isn't great. It's not great. The tackle rate is kind of interesting. I think the missed tackle rate is kind of bumping up a little bit there to kind of skew that number. But his pressure rate, we talk about how pressure rates, in terms of like the middle of the teens and upward, it's kind of what you're hoping for. Guess what his pressure rate was? Now, granted, it was on like 78 snaps as a pass rusher, but that being said, for the entire season. But that being said, guess what his pressure rate was last year?
Oh man, I have no idea. you're catching me on what I'm trying to think would be a good pressure rate for him coming on the corner.
Just literally say an absurd number, like that's at the top of your head.
I mean, I'm guessing when they're sitting him with a reason to get sacked. So, I mean, is he like in the 40 or 50% range in pressure rate?
That would be absurd. Yes, but
I was gonna
that's
say,
too absurd. He was at 28% pressure rate.
okay,
Which,
28. So I was gonna, well, almost 30. So that is ridiculously high. Okay. I was
yeah,
like throwing out an insane number. I'm like, dude, was he like 40% or something insane? 28%. Well, pretty insane. So yeah, that's great. Well, and I was just losing. I mean, the guy is, he's 35 years old, but he's just been giving you, I mean, he's 6 out of the last 7 years. He has over 70 solo tackles. And like you said, sack wise, every one of those years, he's over 4 sacks but one, and he had 3 for a middle linebacker. I mean, that's great. I mean, he's a guy that's just a steal. I've been telling people in redraft, I'm grabbing him all over the place because he's just free late. Like people forget about him. He's older. You can get him at a really nice price. And even in Dynasty, I tell people I have no problem drafting older linebackers that I know are going to get tackles, that I can wait a year or two for my young guys to get in the fold. I can play these older guys for a couple of years. I look at older middle linebackers like older running backs. If those guys can produce for me, I don't care that I'm not getting a lot of years out of them. I still want them for the 2 or 3 good ones I can get out of them.
100%. I mean, it's one of those things where linebacker is more deep than other positions for IDP purposes. So again, if you are wanting to go heavy into your edge rushers and kind of get that upside there, and you kind of fade linebacker to a certain point, the guy was LB19. He's a firm LB2. So I mean, like, yet people are going to draft.
And I guarantee you're getting him at a great price. That's what I'm saying. You're getting him at an absolute great price in drafts.
100%. Now, the real question here for the Saints is who's going to be the linebacker too? You have Pete Werner, who was the LB58, averaging 8.9 points per game, 60 total tackles of 30, solo tackles of 33. It is his tackle rate was 11.1%. Again, not great numbers, but certainly better than the person they picked up in free agency from last year, Willie Gay. 9.3% tackle rate in Kansas City. And yet these two are like going to be jockeying for the LB2 position here, starting opposite Demario Davis. And it really comes down to like who's going to be the shittiest and who's going to be the least shitty. And I honestly have to give it to Werner here, just because of the metrics we saw. We did see him a couple seasons ago be utilized as a pass rusher. He just kind of one of those Swiss Army knife kind of linebackers. But man, you bring over the experience that Willie Gay has had over in Kansas City, but I feel like his metrics and his numbers have just taken kind of a downhill turn as he's just been getting older, and Pete Werner still has age on his side. They're both entering a contract years, so whoever wins this job is probably not going to be back next year. So it's a lot of unknowns. My personal take here is that they're going to cancel each other out. They're just going to be cycled in a rotation with one another and making both of them kind of fantasy not viable. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different take here for the LB2 here?
Yeah, when Kansas City re-signed Drew Tranquill and moved on for Willie Gay, I think that was like, okay. They realized that he might be on the downside for sure in his career. Werner was a guy I was super high on going into last season. And then, man, it just was like, it seemed like he wasn't making a ton of impacts, like a ton of impact plays. And so it's frustrating because I think he's got the talent, and he's a guy I think that people in the IDP community were fairly high on last year, expecting him to kind of step up. And eventually, Davis maybe, slowing down and Werner taking over, and it just didn't happen. Davis continued to be him, making the plays, and Werner was just average. He was just very average last year. So I'm not totally out on Werner, but man, you can get him at a steep discount this year if you're one of those guys that thinks, hey, maybe this is the year he puts it together for the Saints. I mean, it's going to be interesting because this is not a very good division. Like you said, coming in, and the Saints probably overall have the best defense. If you just look at like everyone all the way from front to back. They probably have the most complete defense in this division. So it'd just be interesting to see if guys like Werner take another step and really solidify this defense, because I think that's how this if the Saints are going to win this division, and I know we're not really going on that talking about that right now, but if they're going to win it because the defense really plays well, and guys like Werner and Granderson step up, and Davis continues to do what he does, and Jordan and Chase Young have big years. I think that's how this team is going to succeed. So I'm looking at this defense, and then in my mind, I have a high upside for them. I think they could be really good. But right now, I really feel like this is the all value team. I feel like no one's overdrafting anybody on the Saints, but there's some really solid players that are going to give you IDP value. So this is a team I'm actually, really looking at in drafts, because I feel like I can get guys at reasonable prices.
Let's go down to the defensive back situation here, and man, it is not great. You have Tyrann Mathieu, who finishes the DB 57, despite playing over 300 box snaps. Only got you 50 total tackles and 50 solo tackles and 25 assisted tackles, averaging 7.9 points per game. Opposite him, second-year player Jordan Howden. The Saints are so happy with their safety situation that they're bringing in Justin Simmons now this week to talk about him coming on as a potential starting safety next to Tyrann Mathieu. For me, this is just avoid at all costs the defensive backs for the Saints. You can find better in your fantasy drafts, or are there redeeming qualities here? If Justin Simmons, for example, JT signs with the Saints, is he viable?
I think so. I actually have Justin Simmons in quite a few dynasty leagues, but I also took him in some redraft leagues earlier this summer. Thinking I thought he would end up in a pretty good spot. I really thought the Colts would be the landing spot for him, just because they desperately needed a veteran free safety on that team. I just it's blown my mind that Chris Ballard hasn't gone out and got him. But this would be a nice spot for him for the Saints. Again, does anybody expect the Saints to win the Super Bowl? No, but this division's wide open. And if they can get a little bit better in positions like safety, if you look at the overall net, the stats, the metrics, Simmons has dropped a bit the last couple of years. Tackle numbers have dropped a bit. The coverage numbers are not as good. I still think he's a solid player for IDP purposes. And I think if he ends up on this team, there's no way he's not the starter. So I like him there. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry gets into the lineup sooner than later at cornerback, the rookie at Alabama. But again, he's not really a guy I'd be looking to add to my team unless teams just throw at him all the time. But this defense is bad enough in the secondary. I don't think there's going to be one guy they're targeting. So that kind of knocks that out for me. I'm really surprised they didn't go slot corner somewhere in the draft. I feel like that's a spot they could be better at. But like you said, I think the weakest part of this team is the secondary.
All right. Well, speaking of weak teams in terms of defense, let's go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because this one, I guess weak is probably a wrong word to use. Sorry, all the Tampa Bay fans, but like a lot of unproven people here, or maybe proven people who've been there for a long time that still haven't proven themselves. Although there are some bright spots. And let's start with the bright spot of Yaya Diaby, second-year player. 7.5 sacks last year, which I want to say was, in terms of defensive linemen, in the top 13, top 14 of all defensive linemen in the NFL. So once the snaps started going his way from week 10 on, he got you 20 pressures, 7 sacks, averaged 10.7 points per game. If you take that number, 10.7 points per game, and you have that be, the average that he would have had for the entire season, he would have been a top 15 DL in fantasy for Fantasy Pro scoring. Had a pressure rate of 10.6%. He suffered an ankle injury last week. Fortunately, it's something that, little rest and, ice and compression can't take care of. I'm excited for him. I think he's definitely a value. I definitely want to go after him in Dynasty, if not already. And for redraft purposes, again, somebody who I may take as my third defensive lineman, depending on how deep I'm rolling. If I only start 2 defensive linemen and I have a shallow bench. He's staying on my waiver wire, but he definitely showed some flashes. I kind of want to see what the extent of this ankle injury is, though, as we progress through the month of August. But look, from week 10 on, 20 pressures, 7 sacks. The guy just produced, and I think he's kind of one of the bright spots here on this Tampa Bay defense. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's one of the guys I want to take a look at. He's a young guy. He feels like he's like, okay, he started to pull it together at the end of last year. So he's the guy I'm definitely interested in. Dynasty purposes, right now, set to be played behind him. I think he could work his way into the lineup maybe at the other DN spot, and that's Chris Braswell, the rookie, second round pick. I like him a lot. He's a guy, obviously, redraft I'm not going after at all. In Dynasty, if I have a deep bench or I can stash guys on taxi squad, Braswell's a guy that I'm interested in going out and getting there. Those are the guys as far as like the ends, the outside guys that really bring it. Joe Tryon, Shoenka, again, man, he's a former first round pick. He's a guy you just keep thinking like, okay, is this when he's gonna put it together? This is when he's gonna put it together, and you're just like, it just you see some bright spots here and there, but he just never puts it together enough to make you really believe. So he's just a guy that I'm just like, I can't, even when I see his name on the board, I'm like, yeah, it's just not something that excites me at all. So I think Braswell cuts into his playing time as the year moves on.
Yeah.
And then the one guy, Vita Vea, a great real NFL player, stacking the line, not a guy that you want for IDP purposes. He's a run stuffer. He is taking up, 2 guys on the line. The guy I'm interested in a little bit, though, first round pick last year is Kalijah Cansey. Cansey's the guy that I want to keep my eye on. He could be interesting in any format as a defensive lineman, just because he's kind of known for his pass rush. That's why they drafted him out of college, was to bring that inside pressure. If I'm in a league that starts D tackle, he's definitely a guy I want on my roster. Because if he explodes and he really starts bringing that pressure from the inside, which I think he has that capability, he could be a very, very nice guy that's going to give you pass rushing, pressures, QB hits in a defensive tackle spot. So if I'm in a league that starts D tackle, he is definitely going to be on my roster if somebody else doesn't grab him. He's a little more fringe for like a sleeper league D line only. But again, he's one of those guys, go star him, put him on your watch list, and see how he kind of starts out the year, because he might be one of those guys that you want to go and pick up real quick, even in a redraft league. He could be one of those guys that gets off to a nice start this year. So he's the guy I'm keeping an eye on in most leagues, but definitely Dynasty and definitely defensive tackle starting leagues.
All right, let's go to the linebacker position here. No more Devin White. He's off in Philly. But Lavonte David decided to come back to Tampa Bay. And you know what? They are happy he is, because this guy was, again, a hashtag tackle machine. Number 7 linebacker in all of total tackles with 134, 86 to 48, which was amazing. What was amazing, though, he was, in terms of inside linebackers, he was the LB1 in tackles for a loss. I mean, this guy was making plays, in front of the line of scrimmage, behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, the tackles were just racking up. And, no offense to KJ Britt, I think he was a long-term Tennessee Titan for a while. I want to say Britt was.
Yeah, he was.
I'm not. I would love to sit here and blow smoke up people's nuts and say,
it's right. That's exactly how I feel about KJ Britt. I'm like,
yeah, I mean, everybody wants to tell you to go out and find these sleepers who are getting opportunities, but I'm just like, yeah, but he's had a bunch of opportunities, and what has he done with them?
And he hasn't been great. He has not been great. I mean, I'd much rather have David. We might as well, everything you just said about DeMario Davis for the Saints, just rewind that. Lavonte David, same thing. Guy just makes plays. He makes tackles. Doesn't matter. He's 35, 36 years old. He's all over the place. He's a guy still I'm taking until he shows me that he hits a huge decline. There's no reason. Sorry, Levante, if you're listening. 34. I don't want to age him too soon. 34 years old, a young 34. I wish I was 34 once again. Levante, yeah, I'm taking him. I just don't. I've seen a bunch of people like go out and get KJ Brent. I'm like, oh, I just don't like it. If you're in a league that's deep and you gotta scramble to get linebackers because if there's injuries, there's no one on the waiver wire, then go out and grab him. Like, I'm not telling you just avoid him, no, but he's not a guy I'm actively looking to grab unless it's like bench depth. Like, I'm like in a league where I'm like, ooh, I got to get any starting linebacker because I'm in a couple leagues like that where basically if you're a starting linebacker, you're on a roster. There's like none left on the waiver wires. Everybody goes gets them because they're deeper leagues, they're dynasty. So I would get him for that purposes, but man, I would not be playing him expecting big points every week. That's for sure.
Let's talk about somebody who was getting you big points every week. Let's talk about going to the defensive back situation. Antoine Winfield, 122 total tackles. Just
I love Winfield. I love Winfield. You could run down a few more of the stats for everybody because they were ridiculously good. I was crazy high on him going into last season. He was a guy I loved coming out of college at Minnesota. He's just a ball hawking guy that just knows how to play football. So I already liked him a ton. I had him on a load of dynasty leagues because I was a guy that I got him when he was a rookie, or if I knew league started, I was drafting him everywhere just because I really liked him, and I thought he was going to have a big year last year. I just remember in camp he said, they're going to let me just kind of do my thing this year a little more and play where I need to. And I'm like, you sold, because if people were out on him because he's technically the free safety. So, he's not really the box safety. So that makes it harder to take a guy. But man, I remember an interview I heard early in camp, and he's like, they're going to let me kind of do my thing and play where I need to play. And I was like, that's all I needed to hear. I grabbed him in any other league I didn't have him in or made a trade for him or any new league started. I went and got him. And he was fancy gold last year. For everyone who hates defensive backs, Antoine Winfield won a lot of people leagues last year.
I mean, he had 12 pass breakups too, which goes back to that whole free safety coverage, snap opportunities he had there. Here's the thing. Recency bias is a you-know-what. People are going to see last year he finished, as I believe, as a defensive back, one in fantasy points. Yeah, he had an average of 15.3 points per game. People are going to overpay. The question here is, though, is if you've addressed your starting defensive lineman, you got at least one quality linebacker, do you reach for Winfield in terms of being shrewd or in terms of where you're drafting? And I'm asking you specifically, JT, or do you let somebody else pay up on that and get more depth at another position?
For me, it really, again, it kind of goes back to scoring a little bit. Like if I could look at my home dynasty league, he was number 7 overall, almost 19 points a game in my league scoring because I give more for pass deflections and interceptions than typical leagues. So he was number 7 overall total, all defensive for me in one of my leagues. So he's a guy I'm willing to pay up for. It just depends on your strategy. Are you a guy that waits? There's people that are just going to wait no matter what. I don't mind grabbing him early. I really don't. Now, when I say that, I always got to make a caveat. I'm not grabbing him over the top like 4 or 5 inside linebackers, edge rushers. I'm not taking him over those guys. But if he ends up being a top 20 IDP player off the board, I have no problem with that. I really don't. And so you're going to get guys in your league who are maybe overdrafted because they see what he finished last year. You're also going to see the opposite side. You're going to see those guys who are anti-DB, and they're going to go, well, he's going to have a bad year this year because he was the number 1 scorer last year, which means he's going to be like number 30 this year. That is a chance you take with the defensive backs. I just think this defense isn't better than it was last year, and he basically had to be everywhere last year, and I think he's going to have to be everywhere this year. They were a nice story. The Bucs were a nice story. Baker Mayfield was a nice story last year. I think they're going to get a little dose of reality this year. But I still think Winfield's going to have to make a ton of plays. I have no problem taking him. But with that said, do not take him where if your mindset is if he doesn't finish his DB1, I'm going to be upset about it. Don't draft him then. If that's where you're drafting him, like, oh, I'm taking him because he's going to be DB1, don't do it. You're going to be disappointed. If you take him in a spot where you're comfortable and you say, hey, if he finishes top 15 to 20, where he's basically a DB1 to low end DB to DB2, high end DB2, if you're in that mindset and you're comfortable with it, then I say pull the trigger. But just don't get too ahead of yourselves. But I'm one of those, I'm taking him unless somebody just reaches and takes him way early. I love Winfield. I just think he's a baller, man. He's a guy that he is a football player. The guy just goes out and knows ball. He knows where to be. And I just love the fact that they do everything with him. Pass breakups, interceptions, fumble recoveries, forced fumbles, sacks. I mean, the guy's everywhere.
No, love it. Love it. I think that covers everybody for Tampa Bay that we really need to be covered.
There's nobody else I really want on Tampa. If you were real desperate at safety, you could maybe grab Jordan Whitehead, but that would be like, okay, man, I'm at the end of my draft. I need to fill in, and I need another safety. That maybe I go there, but those aren't guys I'm targeting whatsoever. And I'd be well. I will say this: if I'm in Dynasty, I'm looking at Tyke Smith, the third rounder. He's right now backing up Jordan Whitehead. I would not be surprised if by mid-year he ends up taking that starting job. So he's the guy I liked a lot coming out of college. So he's the guy, if you have a deep roster Dynasty, you have room to stash a guy and you don't need him to play. That's my other guy I'd be stashing, Tyke Smith and Chris Braswell.
Nice, or not, I guess, depending on how we're looking at this division so far. Let's get into
it's like every team has like one or two pretty playable guys, and everybody else is like real French.
And like, yeah, and like you there's some divisions where it's like, the LB2, DL2, DB2, perfectly viable as your starter. Don't worry about it. That is not the case in the NFC South.
This is like the complete opposite of the AFC North. Where there's just defensive studs everywhere on every team. And then we get down here, we're like, God, I don't even know if that guy would start on these other teams, but okay.
It's like pick your spots carefully. All right, let's go to Carolina. I guess we should go to Carolina. And we get to
probably going to play a lot of defense this year.
Yeah, probably, which can be good for IDP. They're on the
field,
they have more opportunity. Let's start up front. Last year, defensive tackle Derek Brown, 103 total tackles, just absurd on 7 sacks. Just 15 quarterback hits. I mean, when I'm looking at his performance in terms of total tackles amongst all defensive players, every position in the NFL last year, in terms of total tackles, he is 14th overall.
For a defensive tackle, that's just freaking insanity. It really is.
Now, I'm on ourlads.com, and sometimes they're on, sometimes they're off with what they're talking about, but more often than not, I find them to be pretty reliable. He's listed as the left defensive end, moving from inside to out. What does that do for you in terms of making you feel comfortable in drafting him, or maybe not drafting him this year?
So I think the difference is I think Carolina ran more of a typical 4-3 last year. I think they're adjusting to a 3-4 this year. So he's still going to be on the inside. If you look at what they're doing, so they signed Davian Clowney, and they also have DJ Wonnum, who they got from Minnesota. So those guys have been defensive ends their entire career. So they're listed here as outside linebackers, but let's be honest, those guys are going to be rushing the passer 90% of the time. they're not going to be dropping into coverage a lot. So while Brown on our lads is listed as a left defensive end, I think he's really still going to end up being that outside 3-tech, more of a 3-tech defensive tackle. Is what I think he's going to be. So so now I get this question all the time. What defensive tackles would you take in a sleeper league where you're only playing D lineman, you don't start defense tackle? This is one of those guys. Put him on your list because he makes tackles. He pressures the quarterback. This is a guy, if you miss out on the big-time edge rushers early in the draft, which I had a draft not too long ago that happened where I took a ton of linebackers. I loaded up there. I grabbed a couple of the top end safeties, DBs. I missed out on a lot of the edge rushers. So I ended up having to go D tackle rushers that got pressure on the ball. And I had to load up on defensive tackles that put pressure on the ball because I missed out on those prime DN edge rushers. He's the guy I would take. He's the guy that's going to be high on my list. I want him because the tackle numbers are absurd. Plus, he still gets the line. Like, I was looking at my home league. He was number 2 out of all defensive tackles in my home league, only behind DeForest Buckner in scoring. And he, in my home league, put up double-digit points in every week but 4 for a defensive tackle. That's insanity. So he's a guy I want. I'm taking him whether it's defensive tackle start league or not. Now, if you're in defensive tackle start league, he's one of the guys you want on your list going, if I want to win a position, this is a guy I want because he's going to win you that position over somebody else's defensive tackle. So I definitely want him higher on defensive tackle. But sleeper leagues, yes, Derek Brown is totally worth taking. He's a guy to target when everybody else has gone edge rusher, and you still need a good defensive lineman that can tackle and pressure the quarterback. He's my guy.
Now, you mentioned Jadeveon Clowney a little bit earlier, coming from Baltimore, and really have a resurgence, with Mike McDonald there in Baltimore. Comes to Carolina. Are we drinking the Kool-Aid still? Are we believing in the resurgence that we saw last year? Or are we still
We've talked about this with a few teams. This team slightly reminds me of when we talked about the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah.
So many new faces, new coaching staff. I could see these guys having a resurgence, or I could see everything falling apart. Because it's like all these new guys, but a lot of them are older. I mean, you've got Wanham, who's already on the PUP list. You got Clowney. You got Shaq Thompson. You got Josie Jewell coming over, new as an older player as well. You got Ajon Robinson. Like, really, they got rid of why am I blanking right now? Brian Burns went to the Giants, so they lost their stud rush outside pass rusher. So it's like, I'm looking at the scene now, and I'm like, man, this team went, I think we're going to be bad, and we're just going to sign a bunch of older veterans and hope they got 1 or 2 solid years left in them. And if they don't, then we're just going to suck it up and be like, okay, we got another huge, super high draft pick. Because, they are really teetering with this team. Like, this defense, I could see it being manageable because they've got talent. But, man, new players, new system, older players, I could see this absolutely falling apart in Carolina. I really could.
Yeah, it's not looking good. And let's talk about something that's not looking good. It's this linebacking situation,
Yeah. Like you said, Clowney and Wanham, like, those are 2 guys and to answer, because I didn't fully answer your question, I'm taking those guys late. If I'm looking to just fill in a back end roster spot and hoping they could do something, I'm taking them. If it's like more of a shallow league, there's no way I'm drafting either one of those guys.
Yeah, fair enough. Good call. I 100% concur with what you just said. To be honest with you, even in a deep league, I may still avoid. It depends on who's available still.
I would almost rather take a young guy that I'm going to look for the upside on to get one of those guys and hope he has. Here's the thing is, I could see Clowney, I could see both of them having 1 or 2 big games this year and then basically disappearing the rest of the time. and they'll get 1 or 2 games, and everyone's like, oh, here we go. Get 2.5 sacks, like 4 or 5 tackles, a couple pressures, and then all of a sudden you're like, they do nothing for 3 weeks when everybody picks them up off the waiver wire.
Right, exactly. Let's go here to the linebacking position. Shaq Thompson, Josie Jewell. What are our thoughts here?
This is the question. I mean, both these guys have been good tacklers in the past. They've made a lot of tackles. I have a feeling one of these guys is going to have a monster year. I'm not 100% sure which one I believe it is, but I just think one of them is going to have a ton of tackles because I just think teams are going to run all over this team. I think they're literally just going to run at this team nonstop, and these guys are just going to be grabbing guys 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 yards downfield. We've seen it. Who's good at that? Josie Jewell's been really good at that in his career. He's really good at making a lot of tackles downfield. So, I mean, he's a guy that, on a new team, new system, coming over from the Broncos, I could see him being good. The guy I really want in this group, and it's probably not going to pay dividends this year, but if you're in Dynasty, the guy I want is Trevin Wallace, the 3rd-round rookie. I really liked what I saw on him in tape. I was really high on him in my rookie rankings. I actually had him, as far as if you went off the ball inside linebackers, I actually had him as my off the ball inside linebacker 4 in this draft class. So I really liked him. I think he's a guy that they really like in Carolina, and I think you're going to see him playing sooner rather than later. I think this is a holdover year. I think Carolina knows it. I think they know they're going to be bad this year, and they're just like, hey, let's get some veterans. Let's try to look like we're holding court. When it all falls apart, we'll get the young guys in, and then we'll draft really high in the draft again next year, and then we'll start the rebuild with these young guys. I think the idea is they're not trying to kill these young guys' spirit by just getting destroyed this year. They're getting some of the veterans and letting these guys learn, which I think is a smart move. But Trayvon Wallace is the guy I want. He's a stash for me, and if you don't have a big lineup, can't take him, put him on that watch list. Keep an eye and see if one of these guys gets hurt or if he starts working his way into the lineup.
Good call. Defensive back, that kind of is cleared up a little bit with Xavier Woods now being the guy at strong safety. Do you feel comfortable having him as a DB3 or 4 for you?
That's where it's at for me. I like what you said. DB3 or 4. I'll play him there. If I'm starting him, I'm nervous. If he's my top 1 or 2 guys. He's probably the one guy I want in the secondary. I don't feel comfortable about any of these guys. I mean, J.C. Horn's a really good cornerback. We know that, but he's a shutdown guy. They're not going to throw at him. They're going to throw away from him. So he's a good player, but he's not going to do anything for you fantasy wise. So Woods is the guy I'm taking in this unit. Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott, both guys have experience. They've put up okay IDP numbers over the years, but 2 guys that aren't great players. I don't like their nickel slot situation very well at all. I don't like those guys. So if I'm taking anybody in the secondary, it's Woods.
Okay. All right, let's go then to Atlanta. Let's go to the Dirty. Is that what they call it? I don't even know if that's a real thing.
Dirty South. The Dirty South. Atlanta. Dirty South.
Wow. I know nothing. Okay.
I watched Hip Hop Revolution on Netflix. That's why I know. That's a great episode. Anybody who's really into hip hop, if you've never watched Hip Hop Revolution on Netflix, shout out, go watch it. It's awesome. They go through the time periods of the start of rap in all the different areas of the country where different rap started. It's awesome. As a kid who grew up in the 90s and absolutely loved 90s rap, it was phenomenal to watch. So if you've never watched that, go check it out.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go to the Atlanta Falcons. And literally, there are 1, 2, 3 people we could really talk about, to be honest with you. Like Lorenzo Carter, edge rusher, outside edge rusher, Arnold Ebiketie. No, come on. No, right? I mean, it's Troy Anderson, Nate Landman. That's the camp battle, I think.
The battle is the linebackers. Honestly, the battle's the linebackers here. And then, the guy who had a superstar year last year and Jesse Bates at safety. I mean, they're really the guys we're looking at here.
What do you think of?
I was gonna laugh. I was trying to look up something real quick on my phone because their sleeper has one gigantic mess up as far as points scored this year on defense, and it's this made me pop up my head. Sorry, Arnold Ebakite I think is how you say his name. I might be wrong on that. The end for them, he is extremely over projected for points on sleeper. Like they have him scoring 70 more points than TJ Watt and Max Crosby. They have 80 more. They have him scoring 80 more points than Max Crosby in an IDP league. So if you're on sleeper and you're drafting right now, I am going to give you the warning, and you're going to thank me. Do not draft Ibagite thinking that like somehow sleeper knows something that you don't know, that he's at the top of the list. Because if you go points projected, he's the number one guy on the list for IDP. Just look at that and go, something got screwed up. Do not be being like, oh, well, I must have just didn't realize this guy and grab him real early. Don't do it. So that's my warning to the people tonight. I did my good deed. I'd seen him in a couple sleeper drafts, and I'm just like, somebody jacked up a number in that projection algorithm for him, because it's like he's like almost projected for like RB1 numbers in an IDP league. It's wild.
That is pretty insane. What about Richard Grant? Any love for Richard Grant, or is it kind of like, nah, it's really the Jesse Bates show?
I'm really worried about him because there's word that he might not end up winning that starting spot. Like, he has been okay. He's not been bad, but there's word that DeMarco Helms is really challenging him there, which kind of surprised me, to be honest with you. That scares me. So I'm a little lower on Richie Grant because of that reason. Obviously, Jesse Bates is the guy to own. He was along with Winfield, was like kind of that breakout DB star last year, just a guy that did everything. In my home league, Antonio Winfield was 1. Jesse Bates was number 2 in scoring. Just unreal stats. I'm not sure where he went in the overall for you guys, but just looking at his stats, I mean, he just had a fantastic year last year. A couple tackles for loss. I mean, million tackles, had 6 picks, 3 forced fumbles, 11 passes defended. So Jesse Bates was all over the place, and I kind of feel like if Atlanta has a shot, it's kind of like Antoine Winfield. He's going to have to be all over the place again because he's pretty much the guy there in the secondary.
Yep.
Jorge, let's the one thing I think is the most interesting thing to talk about on the team is this linebacker battle.
Okay.
I've been hearing all kinds of stuff. I'm not sure what to believe. So I have been a Troy Anderson truther since he came out of Montana State. He's still considered like the greatest athlete to ever play there. He played quarterback, running back. I mean, the guy did everything there before coming out. I really think he ends up getting back in. The injuries have kind of caught up to him. Nate Landman took a spot last year with the injury, and then Caden Ellis came in and played really, really well for them. There is word out there that Nate Landman has quoted at practice saying he's the green dot. Ooh. And that he is the green dot. He is in there, which I am a little shocked about. I thought Landman played well last year. He was like a waiver wire darling. If you picked him up in a deep league, he helped you big time at linebacker if you had injuries. I'm a little surprised that he's claiming that he is the green dot, and that when it's him and Anderson, he's the green dot, and he's going to share it occasionally with Ellis when it's him and Ellis. So, again, I've read that. The reports, I can't confirm that's 100%, but that's what I'm hearing. So I'm a little iffy on this because I have to tell you, I have a lot of shares of all 3 of these guys. I think Ellis was just really solid last year. I think he starts. the big question is what happens with Anderson and Landman, because right now in all the leagues I'm drafting, and I don't have the data right in front of me for what the overall drafts are. I can only tell you from the drafts I've been in, Anderson is going way ahead of both those guys in drafts. I mean, way ahead, like 4 to 6 rounds ahead of Ellis and like almost 10 rounds ahead of Landman. So right now, if it's true and Landman ends up winning the green dot and being the play caller, he is the steal right now in drafts, especially redraft. He is the absolute steal because you're getting him like he's an LB 4 or 5. And he's a guy that put up solid enough numbers last year that he could be your LB 2.
Definitely something to pay attention to as the weeks go on in the month of August. And of course, if there's any definitive resolution there, we'll of course tell you here on Shoot the Gap. Hey, by the way, Landman locked and loaded. Go get him with LB.
I love Troy Anderson. I'm just saying what I'd love to see Anderson in there. He's a more athletic guy over Landman, but we'll see with the injuries whether he bounces back or not.
Fair enough. All right, folks, we told you it was going to be not pretty, but hopefully our pretty faces make up for the lack of prettiness in IDP content. So thank you very much for tuning in to Shoot the Gap. And again, just next week we'll be back again at the same time, or we're back to our usual time at 10 p.m. Eastern. And for those of you who didn't catch the beginning of the show, we announced here in the Fantasy and Frames, area network brand that we're bringing on fantasy hockey with JT and Toast coming up here with Around the Ice, the fantasy hockey podcast that should be premiering pretty soon.
Look for us next Tuesday night. Next Tuesday night, probably 9 Eastern would be my guess, but check Twitter to make sure and look on there. We'll make announcements, get the exact time locked down, but it'll be most likely between 8 and 9 Eastern time on that. So probably about 9 Eastern is what I'd expect for us running on Around the Ice. And once we get that locked in, we'll run that throughout the year.
Well, there you go. Love it. All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for Shoot the Gap. For those who are going out to the Fantasy Football Expo, see you tomorrow.
Have a shot for me, guys. Appreciate it. Sorry I'm not going to be there. I'm going to miss you.
We'll pour one out for you, JT, and everybody else. You all have a great evening.